Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because this is actually the first review that I've done in, I don't know, probably over a year now, if I recall correctly. So I'm excited to get back to it because I get to finally talk about a film that I've been waiting to see for quite some time in Prisoner of War. Now, there are a number of different reasons why I was very excited for this movie, but the two main reasons were the fact that not only just because of Scott Adkins, I'm a massive Scott Adkins fan. It's just that it was Scott Adkins working in another action film, but with, in my mind, a true legend in the industry in Louis Mandylor, who, in my opinion, is a truly underrated gem in this industry. There's so much about that I can say about this guy. I've already said it ad nauseum, but I mean it every time I say it. This guy is truly one of the best, if not the best, in the business because this guy has done it all and he's good at everything he does. So if it sounds like I'm kissing ass, I'm not. Trust me when I'm saying that because this guy is that good. And this movie, in my opinion, showcases what he can do more or less in a nutshell that I believe he's accomplished with this movie because there's a lot of great things that I do love about this film. But I'll also be the first to admit, I know this is not a perfect film, but as far as the action genre is concerned, this is a damn near perfect movie. And I loved so much about this film that I'll be getting into more in depth here because this movie happens to offer something a lot more than I had anticipated, which was the fact that this is a really great character story. And a lot of it was a really good character study as well, too, that I think this movie does a great job in accomplishing here. So, of course, I'll be getting into all the positives, all the negatives, and then I'll get into my rating. During World War II, Japanese forces captured James Wright, a British SAS officer, and hold him captive in a prisoner of war camp in the Philippines. Before the entire colony embarks on a Bataan death march, Wright and his fellow prisoners are forced to fight in brutal death matches for the entertainment of their captors. And that right there is a film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with this movie has to do with Scott Adkins. Now, I've gone at length before on previous reviews that I've done here on the channel for Scott Adkins films that I really do believe that Scott Adkins is truly an underrated actor. In fact, I understand, and it's 100% accurate that people will look at him as an action star. Like he's one of the, in my opinion, he's easily top 5 of the Mount Rushmore of action stars of all time. He's like one of the absolute best. But my point being is that as an actor, I think it's overlooked like what he can really do, like the range that he has as an actor. Because again, a lot of the films he does are typically action films, and sometimes not any fault of his own. They're kind of the same almost persona with almost every other character that he plays. But every once in a while, he'll get a part that really does push his acting limits. And one example that I always point to people about where you can really see what he can do is the film that made me look at him as an actor in Savage Dog. And that's a film that was written and directed by Jesse V. Johnson, who's another truly underrated filmmaker in this industry as well, too. But that was a film that made me look at Scott Adkins as the actor. Not to say that I didn't notice him as an actor before, but it just gave me a whole new set of lenses for me to look at him where I truly respected what he was able to pull off with this character, the emotional anger and the depth that he was going through with this character in that movie. And it made me look at him in a different light. And then you have other films like Avenger, which is a fucking phenomenal movie, but that does show you a different side of Scott Adkins where you see him kind of start off, not want to say innocent, but in a different light, and then all of a sudden as the story progresses, you realize this guy's been through some of the worst situations, and it came out more like an animal, but still try to maintain some humanity along the way as well too, which is not a very easy thing to do, and having to do that in a 16-day window for the production there, and having to do all that says a lot about him as an actor. So with this particular film, for me personally, this showcases what he can truly do, albeit in somewhat of a different light, where you get to see something different with Scott Adkins, where sometimes he doesn't even say a whole lot in certain situations when it comes to the adversity he's dealing with in his film. In fact, there's a conversation that Lewis and Scott had recently on Scott Adkins' show, our YouTube channel, on a show called The Art of War, where he talks about the decisions that him and Lewis were making together about what kind of story they want to tell. At the end of the day, they want to tell a character story that just happens to feature a lot of action sequences in the film. Lewis said something that was very, very interesting for me, and it had to do with a scene in the movie where Scott Adkins' character, James Wright, had killed the main villain's second right-hand man in attempt to escape the prison camp. And then in the process, when Scott Adkins had been questioned by this general, like, hey, where did you learn to fight? And he didn't really answer. And then he said, this guy that you killed, he's like a brother to me. And, and you can tell that he was kind of hurt by that, but he still kind of kept a very stone face in a way. And then Scott Adkins says something that I wouldn't say broke the guy, but like made him lose that stone cold look where he was like, my condolences. But he says it in such a sincere way that you can see that he meant it, and he respected the bond that these two had, and he felt bad for taking that away from him. And then the character in Ito was looking at him like, holy shit, like it's like he was surprised to see the sincerity, but also surprised to see that this man understood the value that that these two had together, that relationship they had, and what it meant to him, and what he had done to take that away from him, and how it would have affected him as well too. And it's a subtle thing that I don't think maybe many people may realize, but I'm hoping subconsciously they'll pick up on that and understand that this guy clearly saw something in him that he did not expect at all, that he probably doesn't get to see in any Western for that matter, because that's something that would be a more cultural thing with the Japanese. But in this particular case, this is a Western man who's telling him this stuff in the same form as he would say it if he were in the Japanese culture, if that makes any sense. And that's a very subtle thing to do, but to pull it off in a very accurate emotional light, I think that's a very difficult thing to pull off here, and Scott Adkins did that in spades, in my opinion. So there's a lot more that Scott is able to pull off here in terms of his acting range that you really get to see. No doubt, does he do a phenomenal job with the action sequences? That's something that's never going to go over my head. But it's not going to be a question for me. But when it comes to the acting range that he's able to pull off here, this is a prime example of what he can do at a really, really high level. And what's also phenomenal about this movie, too, is the fact that everyone in this movie, and I mean literally everyone in this film, does not have a phone-in performance. I think one of the best things about this movie is that the villain, who I have the name here because I'm going to forget it here, played by Peter Shinkato, who plays the character of Lieutenant Colonel Ito, this is a guy that I don't necessarily look at him as a villain, even though he is the villain. There's no doubt about that. But the reason why I don't look at him as a villain is because the one thing about his performance in that film, for me personally, is that you get to see some real complexity with his character, where he's on the verge of breaking down, where he's questioning what's going to happen next, and he's kind of like losing his mind in a lot of ways, although you don't really see it that way. But it's like he's keeping his composure, but those gears are starting to get a little loose there, where you can see it through his facial expressions, but you don't see it through his body language. It's like you're seeing a man who's just keeping his composure, and that takes some serious discipline. So you can tell that with this character, that this is a guy that has learned the value of maintaining discipline at the highest level, and he's near that breaking point where he's just like, I'm about to lose my mind, but he still is able to maintain his composure, but showcasing those cracks in the armor in some other format, whether he's shooting people at random or he's just disregarding other people's opinions on matters that deals with the prisoners in the camps and whatever else. Like you can tell, like he's just kind of like isolating himself, where he's just not really trusting anybody, because this is a man who's been taught to figure shit out and always be on top of it and have that form of respect. It's like it's a cultural thing that you get to see with this character, and at the same time too, he also understands with the character of James Wright that this is a guy who's not like anyone's ever seen before, not because he does something that I have seen before in my culture, but he's doing something that I've seen before in my culture, but for someone else who's not in the culture, if that makes any sense. And he picks up on that right away, and he starts to kind of test him and push him further to really show, is this guy for real? And he's seeing more and more, this guy is the real deal. And you start to understand why he just doesn't flat out kill him. There's a sense of honor that he maintains, that he's showing respect to the hero of this movie. So he's put him through the ringer, if you will, by basically putting him through these set of hurdles for him to overcome. He's overcome all of them, and now he's like, what do I do now? So they have the final battle at the end of the film, which I'm not going to reveal too much here, but you can kind of get the gist of it. When you watch the film, you already know what's going to happen, in my opinion. But my point being is that there is a purpose for everything leading up to the very end of the film, especially the very absolute end of the movie, where everything leads up to that moment. And when it does, it all makes sense at the end of the day, because you understand the culture, you understand the journey, you understand what someone who is an outsider coming into a different culture, being raised in that culture to some degree, and at the same time respects it, honors it, and and understands what it means to those people who are in that culture 24/7. So there's a sense of like understanding that goes without saying in this movie here too. Now, as far as some of the other actors are concerned, I mean, I can go at length here, but the one actor I'm going to point out here is Gary Kearns. Now, Gary Kearns is someone that I really respect as an actor, and someone who I truly believe is also underrated as well too. He is someone in this film that I remember watching the movie, and there were certain things that I had picked up on this film that I felt like was missing. And this is going to kind of go into my negatives, but I'm going to start this off right now because there's something about his character he plays in the movie called Jonesy, where when you first meet him, he's kind of a sarcastic guy, almost in some ways kind of a douchebag. But at the same time, when you start to see the cracks in his armor, you're starting to realize that maybe this is all just a facade. Like he's just putting on an act to kind of keep himself guarded, because the moment some shit starts to come down where it's life and death here, which is pretty much life and death every day for these characters, but when it's life and death for them, you can see that this guy is genuinely scared and terrified, where he's like almost frozen in a lot of ways too. And you're wondering what was this act that you're putting on 10 seconds ago, and all of a sudden now you're scared shitless? Like what's going on here? Like that's how I question the character. And then I come to a conclusion in my mind where there's probably something that we're not seeing here that was left out that could have given more background to the character that would have made me understand the differences of their approach friend, where he's not in danger, he's putting on, in my opinion, a facade, and then when he is in danger, he's scared shitless. And there's something about that missing piece, in my opinion, that I felt like would have been necessary to keep if it was there in the first place, to be able to tell that character's backstory, to understand where he was coming from and why he is the way he is. But would it have been necessary in the first place? Probably not, but it would have been something for myself to really appreciate as a film lover, to understand the purpose of these characters' emotional reaction, if that makes any sense. Now, one thing I also want to point out here too is that, of course, the action sequences in this film are top tier. I am a big, massive fan of keeping everything on camera. Now, I've talked at length before with a lot of films that I've come across in the action genre, where you have to keep you have to be very smart about where you want to shoot these sequences when it comes to the action films, and how you want to pull it off here, so that way when you're showcasing these action sequences, that you see everything and the purpose for certain punches landing the way they are, the setup of certain shots where you're seeing a big punch coming that's very important for the scene and for the overall story, which happens in this movie as well too. And it's all about the setup and then the payoff at the end as well. And that's something that I think this movie does accomplish to a T, where I think that, in my mind, I'm thinking like, if they can pull this off in a short schedule that they had, and all the trouble they had to go through in this production, because one thing about this film is that they were happening to shoot in the Philippines during monsoon season, which is basically, from what I understand, a massive amount of rain that pops and goes at will. And it got to the point where they had to rebuild a lot of sets, stop shooting certain seasons because the rain just came down at a time that they didn't even need the rain. So it was a massive hurdle they had to overcome. But somewhere along the way, they were able to pull it off here, because when you watch the movie, you don't even think twice about that stuff at all, because as a film goer, I know the stuff, but I want to forget it as I'm watching it. And that's what this movie does, in my opinion, accomplish here, where I knew what had happened behind the scenes, but I don't want to think about it as I'm watching it. And one of the things that they do a really good job is that when it comes to the action sequence, you get to see everything play itself out, and there's a purpose for why everything happens the way that it does when it comes to these action sequences. So it's not just action for the sake of action. There is a reason for that. And this movie, in my opinion, does a great job in setting that up from the very beginning all the way to the very, very end. Now, one thing I also want to highlight here too is the directing under Louis Mandylor. I truly believe that Louis Mandylor is one of the best out there. Unfortunately, there was a film that he had done not too long ago called Operation Blood Hunt, and I was very excited for that movie because it's a kind of like an action horror genre, if you will, and I was not really happy with the movie. And I know that Louis Mandylor is a much better director than what we got in this movie, because that particular film, in my opinion, did not do him justice at all whatsoever. That was a film that I felt like was interfered too much. But my point being is that I understood that he had a lot more control with this production, and it shows in this movie. In fact, there's one movie that I always tell people that if you really want to see a really good film, especially in the more or less the horror genre, there's a movie that he had directed called Blackout. That's a fucking phenomenal movie. And that's another film that I felt like he also had a lot more control over as well too. And when you see what he can do and setting up everything that leads to the very end of this film, like, he does a really good job pacing things out. And when you get to the very end of the movie, the payoff is fucking fantastic. And that's the same situation here with this movie as well. I truly do believe that Louis Mandylor understands everything. And I'm literally talking about everything: action, drama, comedy, what else? Just whatever type of other genre, horror, I should say, as well too. Like there's elements of that in this movie as well too, where you have a little piece of almost every genre, but it's not the focus. The focus is the story and the characters and the circumstances they're being dealt with here, and how they're going to deal with that as it progresses along the way. And I think Lewis and the team have done a really good job in showcasing that as well too. One thing I also want to highlight here is the cinematography here. This is a cinematographer by the name of, I believe I'm going to butcher his name here. It's Nico De La Ferry, I think they pronounce his name. This is a guy that I am now a massive fan of. Having come across what he has done with this film, I love the cinematography in this movie. There's actually several sequences in this film that kind of had like a smoky atmosphere that reminded me of Tony Scott shots. Like one film in particular that reminded me of is a scene where it has to do with the movie True Romance, and it's a Sicilian scene where there was a very thick, smoky atmosphere, and you're feeling the tension rise up. And there's a little comedy, there's a little bit of awkwardness, there's a little bit of discomfort, but it's all putting you at ease. And there's a lot of sequences in that film that remind me of those of that particular moment in that movie that does showcase in this film as well too. And I think Nico does a really good job in setting up the atmosphere, but the atmosphere does help tell the story, like set the mood for you and have you be invested emotionally, as far as I'm concerned, to understand what's going on and why it's happening the way it is in the first place. So I got to give a lot of props to Nico. I think he's did a phenomenal job with the cinematography here as well. And then one last thing I want to point out here too is the stunt coordinator in this movie, and this is a gentleman by the name of Stephen Rennie, I think is pronounced his name. If I butchered the name, my apologies. But I understand he also had worked on the movie Monkey Man, which is a film I hadn't seen yet, but I heard wonderful things about the action sequences in that movie. And this particular film, you can tell that they took the action sequences very seriously. There is no playing around with this stuff. In fact, I think one of the best things about this movie is, as I said before, the action sequences in this film is part of the story. It's not just there for the sake of being there. There's a reason why James Wright is able to fight the way he's able to do so, because he has had a background in martial arts, being born in England and then raised in Hong Kong, which at the time, during that era, it was a British territory. So it would make a lot of sense why his character happened to be in an Asian country where there's a lot of martial arts around, and then be able to travel around as a result of his background to be able to learn the various other martial art forms out there: judo, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and various other things along the way. And he's able to showcase all those various martial arts to some degree in this film. And when you see the villains looking at him like, holy shit, this guy knows what he's doing. And not only that, he's better than all of us here. They're clearly very scared of him. But yet, the main villain in this movie, and Ito, just doesn't want to kill him, because there's a sense of honor that comes with that as well too. So everything that relates to all that stuff is very necessary to the story. And Steven, in my opinion, does a really good job in setting those sequences up properly and having the ability to be able to showcase what these characters are going through in terms of the hits, the landing, the pain they're going through, the kills, and all the other things that are related to the action genre. You get to see that done very effectively in this movie, because it is all pertaining to the overall story. So a lot of props to him as well for pulling that off here, in my opinion. So, I mean, there's so much more that I can get into this movie here, because overall, I thought the story was phenomenal. I thought the acting was fantastic. I do believe that the action is incredible, but overall it's a great entertaining movie. But there are some things about the film that I didn't like, which I'll be getting into here now, getting into my negatives. My first negative with this movie really has to do with the runtime. Now, I know that this is a film that I'm pretty positive I can say here that this is a film that deserves a longer runtime. The reason why I believe that is because, albeit that this is a just under 2-hour film, which is a great runtime for an action film, but I always felt like this is a movie that deserved much more time, because there's so much more involved with the characters that I wish we had a lot more time with here. There's one character in particular played by Gary Kearns and Jones. Like I mentioned before, I feel like he's definitely needed more screen time to kind of get a feel for his particular journey along the way, where you understand why he is the way he is. And even though I talked at length before in the positives here about why I felt like it was necessary, there was another character as well too that I always felt like was definitely someone that needed a lot more time, and that was a character played by Donald Cerrone and Captain Collins. Now, this is an actor who it was a former MMA fighter, but he had done a movie with Louis Mandylor that Louis had also directed called 3 Days in Malay. That film made me look at Donald Cerrone as an actor. I really thought like, holy shit, this guy can really act his fucking ass off. And I'm not kissing ass when I'm saying it's like he really can act really well. In fact, in this particular movie, although he does have some minor action sequences in the film, but a lot of time you get to when you spend with this character, it is just really just hanging out with him as a person. And there's one particular scene that I've remembered where I was that got me thinking about more of this character's background, where he's the captain of, I guess, of the prisoners, and he's been there the longest, if I recall correctly. And there's one scene in particular where he's during this whole battle sequence at the end, where he's beating the shit out of this one Japanese guard, and he's wailing on them. And then later on, he gets held captive, and then all of a sudden, you can see him kind of just breaking down, like he's just had enough. And what was interesting for me about that particular moment for his character was the fact that you can tell this guy is at a breaking point. And he's probably been at a breaking point for a very, very long time. And the cracks are starting to show once he started wailing on this guy. Like he's just going all primal on this guy. Like he's ripping guys' throats out. It's like, it's really, really disturbing stuff. And they showcase that for this character. Like this guy is just on the edge. And despite the fact he's calm, collected, in more or less the calm moments in the film, in reality, this guy's probably scared to death, where he's always on the edge. And unfortunately, he does meet his demise. But when those particular moments that I was referring to earlier, where he's just like, it's just going all primal instinct here. Then all of a sudden, he's told to stand still, and he listens. So you see him just emotionally react, where he's just about to like break down and cry. And I felt for the guy, because that made me realize this guy has been through a lot. And somewhere along the way, he's maintaining his composure, but he's literally on a thin string at that point where he's about to break at any point. And somehow along the way, he's able to keep his composure right at the last minute. And it's something that I think says a lot about Donald Cerrone as an actor, where he's able to pull it off. Where in my mind, I would have loved to see a lot more with his character to really get more story about him, more time with him. Maybe not get a full backstory, but just an understanding of what he's going through at that moment, so that when you have those events that occur, I'm not gonna say it makes a lot more sense, but it would help for me. I think for the audience as well too, to truly understand where he's at mentally here, where it would make a lot more sense, if that makes any sense. And the other thing too, I always felt like was a kind of a setback for the movie as well, is that I felt like there's a lot of other sequences in the film, whether it be character moments or just other things that were I would hope would fill up the gaps, that I felt like was what that didn't work for me in terms of like jumping from one scene to the next. Like there was always something that I felt was missing in certain transitions from one scene to the other, that I wouldn't say it felt abrupt, but just didn't seem like it was spliced together too well. It was very few scenes that worked that way, but it is one of those things where I noticed that there was a big jump like that just occurred from one thing to the next, and I felt like there's something else missing in the middle that could have been necessary to leave behind if it was already there in the first place, to be able to have that connective tissue to go from one scene to the next and let it flow more fluidly in that way. I felt like that was something that was a problem with this movie in certain sequences, not the entirety, just certain sequences that I felt it was necessary to be able to have that fluidity, I should say, when it comes to the transitioning from one scene to the next. But overall, though, I think those are really my main sticking points with that film. I've seen the movie twice already here, and I think this is a film that, like I said before, if you're a true action genre lover, I think you may love this film, or hopefully like it a lot, because this movie does offer a lot in my mind of what the action genre can offer here, but at the same time give you a little bit more on top of that to help you be connected with the overall story and the characters as well too. So I know I kind of ended on the positives here for my negatives, but that's in my negatives, and now let's get into my rating. I love this movie, and in my mind, this is a masterpiece of a film in terms of the action genre, yes, but also as a film in general too. Now, granted, I know this isn't like The Godfather, this isn't like Dog Day Afternoon. I get all that, but when I say masterpiece, I'm just talking about in terms of like telling a really good story and understanding what they had to go through in making this film, and the fact that they had so many troubles in the production when it comes to the weathers out there in the Philippines, and having the sets break down, having to rebuild it again, and having to being behind on schedule as well. There's a lot of things that factor in about what they had to go through in making this film. And when you watch that movie, not once did I ever think about knowing full well what was going on behind the scenes, but understand that when I'm watching it, I just enjoyed the film for what it was. At the same time, got a lot more out of the film as well too, because to me, this movie does speak volumes about the great people that are involved in making this film to make a fucking wonderful film with great characters, a great story, great action, overall a great film. So for me, this is a movie that I would always consider as to be a solid cheers. And those are my thoughts on the film. And if you guys have seen this movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on the film. And also, I'll make sure to have a link in the description below for you all to check out the film. And like I said before, it is worth every hard-earned cash to spend money on this movie because I think it's worth your time. It's an absolutely wonderful film. Hopefully, you guys will get a kick out of it. So make sure you guys support the movie by clicking the link below to check out the film and spending your hard-earned cash. And I also want to thank you all very much for checking out my first review in quite some time here on the channel. I plan on getting back more to do more reviews and also getting back to my show, You're So Cool with Robmedina, so be on the lookout for that as well too. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and hit that link down below and also hit the notification bell while you're down there as well too. Also follow NRW on social media on Instagram and Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter, or now X, at the NRW. You can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram, You're So Cool with Robmedina, on Twitter, at the NRW, and also on Facebook, simply just Robmedina. So I want to thank you all very much for checking the review, and until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.